Hi everybody, this is the Vodcast related to disorders of early development. So I have some friends here, some little babies that I'm going to show you in a minute to help illustrate this. So disorders of early development, two kind of focus areas that we're going to be talking about. First of all, there are distinct psychological disorders that emerge in early infancy and early toddlerhood, so we'll talk about those towards the end of the Vodcast. But even more of an emphasis in our talk today is the idea that early patterns can serve as risk factors for later psychopathology. Specifically, we're going to be talking about how difficult temperament can be a risk factor for later psychopathology. As we've emphasized a lot already in the course, we are looking at pathology from a framework of developmental psychopathology. So in other words, we want to understand normative development and then see how different pathways go astray from the normal patterns to see how psychopathology emerges. So we're going to spend a little time talking about normative infant and toddler development right now. In the chapter, touch points or biobehavioral shifts are discussed, and these are basically three periods of time or developmental stages where infants and early toddlers experience different intrapersonal and interpersonal shifts. So the first one would be at the age of 2 to 3 months, like this little baby right here. This is a little 2 to 3 month old in the bundle. A baby at this age is adjusting to life outside the womb, right? So by this age, they have adjusted with their caregiver to patterns of feeding, being comforted, sleeping routines, things like that are established. By 7 to 9 months, that's my friend Bitty Baby here. Here she is, actually. Her name is Kelly. So by 7 to 9 months, the babies have learned to communicate intentions and feelings through gestures. They're not talking per se yet, right? But they're starting to play and their schedules are fairly routine by now. Then we've got Miss Cabbage Patch Doll here, right? The 18 to 20 month old who's talking. This one is saying, I'm hungry. And so by this point, 18 to 20 months, you have your walking, talking toddler who's also able to do a fair amount of independent exploration. So again, three biobehavioral shifts that happen in infancy and toddlerhood. All right, also within the context of normative development, also within the context of normative development, we want to discuss the idea of temperament. So temperament is the biological aspect of the adult personality. It's our innate disposition. Individual differences in mood, emotionality, reactivity, self-regulation, activity level, adaptability. All right, so again, thought to be the earliest form of our personality. And sometimes the snowball metaphor is used. So if you think of a ball of ice that's at the core of a snowball, and then it gets snow sort of formed all around it, the ice represents temperament, that innate biological contribution to personality. And then snow is that evolving adult personality. So the core or the foundation of personality, or the ice, in other words, is the temperament, and then personality forms around that. So temperament is often discussed in terms of dimensions. Remember in our last unit we were talking about dimensional and categorical models. So temperament is discussed both dimensionally as well as categorically. What I have for you here is a list of 5 different dimensions related to temperament. So different dimensions of temperament. There are more than 5, certainly, but here's 5 of the big ones. Reactivity is referring to how excitable the infant is, how intense are their emotional reactions, and how responsive are they, right? So when they cry, is it a very big, loud, intense cry, or is it a low-key whimper? Regulation is how the infant controls this reactivity. Are they able to soothe themselves? Do they respond well when adult caregivers attempt to soothe them? Surgency is another way of talking about extroversion, but in the context of an infant's behavior. And negative affectivity or negative affect is basically negative emotion. So this is the dimension related to how prone to anger, fear, frustration is this infant, how irritable is this infant. Effortful control is the ability of the infant to regulate responses to stimulation. So an example from this age group might be how well is the infant able to focus on something like a toy that you're swinging back and forth or tracking an object amidst lots of other distraction. Like if you have the TV on or there's people walking by, how well can that infant follow what's, that toy that you're asking the infant to track. At older ages, Effortful, that's hard to say, control relates to when a child is able to raise their hand as opposed to just blurting out an answer. So those are both examples of it. So again, all of these illustrate this idea of taking a dimensional approach or a continuous approach to looking at temperament. Thomas and Chess, I'm sure you've encountered in other courses. They did their work in the 50s, and they are very well known for their temperament research. And they sort of merged both a dimensional and a categorical view of temperament. So they looked at 9 dimensions of temperament, some similar to these as well as some additional other ones. And then they also clustered those dimensions and those behaviors into 3 categories. So then they added this categorical approach to temperament. They described infant temperament as being in an easy category, where the infant is very cheerful, easily adapts to other caregivers like babysitters and things like that, and establishes routines easily, very easygoing and cheerful. The slow to warm up category is babies that take a little bit longer to adjust. They have mild, low-key reactions to new stimuli, and they might need time to kind of warm up to a new person or a new environment. And then the difficult temperament, which we'll be talking a lot more about today, which this is sort of the cranky pants baby. So they have more irritable types of mood, and they don't establish routines and patterns easily, and they have trouble adapting to new situations. Alrighty. So we would be remiss in talking only about biological temperament without acknowledging the fact that infant temperament is very bidirectionally related to the caregiver's actions. So as it says here, the interaction of infant temperament with the caregiver's response to that temperament is critically important here. So here we have our little baby. Where is she? Okay, our little baby has a certain kind of temperament, but the parent also has a certain caregiving style. Maybe they're a sensitive caregiver. Maybe they're very good at regulating the baby's behavior. So when the baby starts to cry, do they immediately come quickly and soothe the baby and rock the baby? Or are they very intrusive, maybe in a bad way, with the baby, appropriately helpful? Also, the caregiver's beliefs impact the way that the caregiver interacts with the child, right? You could have a parent who has a mental model where picking up a baby every time they cry would be spoiling that baby, where someone might have a belief where letting that baby cry it out is actually good for them in the long run. So those sorts of belief systems impact how responsive and sensitive that caregiver will be to the baby. The bidirectionality is suggesting that the baby's temperament elicits certain behaviors and responses from the caregiver, and the caregiver's behavior elicits certain temperamental reactions from the baby. So it goes round and around, back and forth. For example, if an infant has negative affectivity, which we just discussed, that idea of negative mood and so forth, that might lead to maternal withdrawal, right, where the mother is not as sensitive and not as responsive to the baby because they're frustrated or starting to feel depressed over so much negative mood. But on the other hand, a withdrawn mother could lead to negative affect from the baby. So it goes back and forth. They can elicit each other. Thomas and Chess also talk about this idea of goodness of fit, where what's critically important is the match between the child or the infant's temperament and the caregiving style. So how well does the child's temperament and behavioral tendencies fit with parental characteristics? So if you have an easygoing temperament with an easygoing parenting style, that's a great match. There are other combinations that are not such a great match. A couple of other additional points, sort of how stable is temperament? Well, we believe that temperament is moderately stable over time and a very good predictor of adult personality. Because it's moderately stable and because it predicts adult personality, that speaks to the genetic basis of temperament. Fairly recently, Caspi, 11 years ago, did a longitudinal study with a very large sample size looking at measuring infant temperament along a variety of dimensions. I think it was actually not infant temperament, I think it was age 3, and then looking at measures of adult personality at age 23, and that toddler temperament was a very strong predictor of the personality at age 23. Some kids are at greater risk for psychopathology because of the negative impact of innate characteristics. What this statement is referring to is the negative impact of the innate characteristic of a difficult temperament, right? So we've said the temperament is generally thought to be innate. One type of temperament you could have is this difficult temperament, And a difficult temperament that has an environmental trigger, such as a high-stress environment, could lead to psychopathology. This is illustrating this diathesis stress model, which we have talked about before, right? So the predisposition or the diathesis here would be the difficult temperament. And then if you have high stress, then that combination could lead to psychopathology, greater risk for psychopathology. You could also have someone with the diathesis or predisposition of a difficult temperament, but they're in a low stress environment, and therefore the psychopathology never emerges.